She was the perfect suburban wife until the day she collapsed and her husband came to claim what he thought was his. The house, the car, her silence. But Caitlin wasn't dying. She was waking up. Behind the quiet smiles and folded towels was a secret life, $1 million company, and a woman ready to burn the lies to the ground. What begins as heartbreak becomes a high-stakes reckoning, and her greatest betrayal will become her fiercest rebirth. Caitlin stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, her motions smooth, practiced. Outside, the autumn wind rustled the red and gold leaves of the maple tree in the front yard. To anyone passing by, she was just another housewife in the quiet Minneapolis suburb, waiting for her husband to come home. No one would guess that just an hour earlier, she had closed a deal worth $3.7 million on a medical supply chain expansion. While quietly sipping tea in her home office upstairs, she adjusted the burner and checked the time. Brandon would be home soon, and if the house didn't smell like dinner, he'd make one of his usual comments, a passive-aggressive jab hidden under the pretense of tired humor. She didn't flinch anymore. After 12 years of marriage, she knew the script to a T. 42, Caitlin had lived 2 lives for the better part of a decade. On paper, she was a full-time housewife with no formal income. In reality, she was the CEO of SilverMed, a booming medical equipment distribution company operating across 5 states. Her name wasn't on any public document. Her late father had taught her to protect her wealth with layers of discretion. To Brandon, she was just his dependent wife, lucky to have him managing the bills and budgeting their modest lifestyle. She heard the garage door open and turned off the burner. Her stomach tightened as his footsteps grew louder. Brandon walked in, set down his briefcase, and sighed loud enough to make sure she noticed. "Smells okay," he said, peeking at the pot. "Not chicken again, I hope." Caitlin smiled tightly. "Beef stew. Your favorite." He grunted in approval and walked into the living room without another word. She watched his back as he disappeared behind the wall, her smile fading. How had it come to this? 12 years earlier, they had met at a mutual friend's party. Caitlin had just turned 30, fresh off a string of heartbreaks and too focused on building her career to bother with relationships. Brandon had been magnetic, not just attractive, but observant. He noticed the smallest things, the way she tapped her coffee cup, how her laugh tilted upward at the end. He made her feel seen, cherished. They were married 11 months later. First, things were wonderful. He was attentive, supportive. She hadn't told him about the company yet. It wasn't secrecy. She told herself, just timing. But as the months wore on, Brandon began to shift. He lost his job in logistics but didn't seem eager to find another. He talked often about needing a break, about how life was harder than people realized. Caitlin, always the fixer, offered solutions. She suggested he apply for a role at her company, administrative. No pressure. He snapped. "What, you think I'm so incompetent I need you to find me a job?" "No. I just don't meddle in my life. I'm not your project." She backed off, swallowing the insult like a bitter pill. Over time, his pride became a wall she couldn't breach. Caitlin began quietly sending him $1,400 a month under the guise of a shared savings account. He burned through it within 2 weeks, then complained about grocery costs, rising gas prices, and how she didn't understand the pressure of being the man of the house. She said nothing. Not when he bought limited edition sneakers. Not when she found receipts for online games. Not even when he snapped at her mother for visiting unannounced, a woman who had been nothing but kind to him. The coldness in their marriage grew like mold in shadowed corners, slow, invisible, but suffocating. She slept alone more often than not. Their conversations became transactions. "What's for dinner? Did you pay the electric bill? I'm going out with the guys." Then came the night she came home from a conference, jet-lagged and feverish. She had caught a brutal flu overseas and collapsed in the entryway. Brandon stood over her, arms crossed. "You look like hell. Hurry up and get better." "I'm not playing nurse." That was the moment something inside her cracked. She didn't leave. Not yet. She was too practical for impulsive exits. Instead, she returned to her quiet resolve, the same strength that had built a company from a laptop in her apartment. But she began preparing. She reviewed every asset, Every account, every contract. When the diagnosis came stage I pancreatic cancer, Caitlin didn't even tell Brandon. She simply packed a small bag and checked into the Mayo Clinic for treatment. When she called to inform him, he didn't answer. When she texted, the response came 2 days later. Hope it's not serious. I'll swing by if I can. He never showed. Lying in the hospital bed, weakened by chemo, Caitlin stared out the window. Snow had begun to fall, soft and soundless. That's when she made the decision. And no more compromises. She picked up her phone and called Eric, her CFO. Eric, she said, I'm ready. There was a long pause. Then his calm voice came through. I've been waiting for this call. Just say the word. 3 days later, the door to her hospital room creaked open. Eric stepped inside, dressed in his usual dark blazer, briefcase in hand. He didn't speak until the door was closed. Then, he walked to the small round table by the window and placed the briefcase down gently. Everything you need is in here, he said, sliding the leather case toward her. Caitlin sat up straighter, her body aching but her mind sharp. Is the legal team ready? He nodded. Documents are drafted. We can start the separation proceedings immediately and initiate contract termination with Vital Tech first thing Monday morning. She let out a soft breath. Do it. Brandon won't know what hit him. Eric raised a brow. Are you sure you're up for this now? You need rest. Caitlin looked out the window, then back at him. I've spent years resting from the truth. It's time to act. Eric didn't argue. He retrieved a set of papers and handed her a pen, and with each signature Caitlin made, another chain around her spirit shattered. The next morning, a fax arrived at Vital Tech's headquarters. It was succinct and devastating. Silver Med hereby terminates the existing contract effective immediately due to conduct violations and failure to uphold ethical partner standards. No further obligations shall be honored as of this date. Attached was an internal report, drafted by Caitlin's legal team, citing reasons related to employee misconduct, derogatory behavior, and professional irresponsibility. By M. Brandon was called into a meeting. By PM, he was fired. At p.m. he stumbled through their front door, pale and wide-eyed. I got laid off, he said, not even looking her in the eye. Caitlin sipped her tea calmly. That's unfortunate. He blinked. They said something about a contract termination. That doesn't make sense. It was our biggest deal. She rose, walked to the desk, and pulled out a folder. Inside was the copy of the contract, the termination letter, and her business card. She laid it in front of him. Because I ended it, she said, her voice low and steely. I'm the CEO, Brandon. Silver Med is mine. It always has been. His face turned white. No, that can't be. For 12 years. I paid the bills. I covered your credit cards, your allowance, your mistakes. You've been living off me while accusing me of being a burden. He staggered back, clutching the edge of the table like it might save him. She slid another envelope toward him. Divorce papers. You have 30 days to move out. The house is in my name. The car title too. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. You can't do this. I already did. Brandon didn't move. He stared at the divorce papers like they were written in a foreign language, as if comprehension would somehow reverse time. You were the CEO this whole time? He muttered. Caitlin walked past him, calm. Yes, the same woman you mocked for doing nothing built the very company that funded your existence. Brandon's jaw worked as if to find the right excuse. Why didn't you ever tell me? She turned, gaze steel. Because I was too busy holding our lives together, and I didn't think I needed to report my success to someone who couldn't see past his pride. Brandon slumped into the kitchen chair, looking stunned. The man who once commanded the house, like a petty king, now looked like a ghost of himself. Caitlin continued. You have until the end of the month to leave. I've contacted the bank to remove your access. All joint accounts are closed. The utilities are being transferred to my name. Alone? Wait, Caitlin. Please save it. You didn't want me when I was strong. Now that you've lost everything, you're not begging for me, you're begging for survival. He opened his mouth, but Caitlin was already walking upstairs. That night, Caitlin slept soundly for the first time in months. When she woke the next morning, the sunlight seemed sharper, the air lighter. Her appetite returned slowly. and she started responding to work emails again. Eric took care of the legal and logistical cleanup, while Eliza Harper, her lawyer, filed the formal divorce papers and asset protection documents. 2 days later, Brandon tried contacting her, first by phone, then by email. When neither worked, he came to her office. Security stopped him at the gate. "Caitlin, please," he shouted. "I'm sorry. We can fix this." From her office window on the third floor, Caitlin stood behind tinted glass, watching him argue with a security guard. She didn't flinch. One evening, Caitlin sat in her hospital room for her final chemo session. The side effects had dulled her senses, but her spirit remained intact. Her phone buzzed a blocked number. She let it ring, then it buzzed again. Then again, against her better judgment. She answered. "Hello?" Brandon's voice, raw and desperate, filled the line. "Caitlin, please don't hang up. I'm losing everything. I can't find a job. The house, they're foreclosing on it. The car's gone. Everyone's cut ties with me." She was silent. He sobbed. "I was wrong. I was blind. I should have seen who you were. I didn't know how much you did for me. Please, Caitlin, one more chance." She said nothing for several seconds, then whispered, "Alyssa Morgan." Brandon froze. "What?" "The intern, 24. The one you used to spend late nights with at the office. The one whose father owns the Chicago branch." Dead silence. "You think I didn't know?" "Vital Tech's CEO reached out to me after our contract ended. He apologized for your behavior. Said an internal report uncovered the affair." Brandon stammered. "It wasn't like that. She came on to me. I didn't mean you meant everything you did." Caitlin cut in, voice cold. "And now, I mean every consequence you'll face." She hung up. Caitlin requested her legal team add a no-contact clause to the divorce. They began preparations to sue for emotional damages, citing his infidelity and negligence. Minnesota law was on her side. The evidence, screenshots of texts, hotel receipts, and even internal complaints from Vital, painted a brutal picture. Eliza smiled as she handed Caitlin the documentation. "We're seeking $85,000 in damages, and he'll be lucky if he avoids formal defamation charges." Caitlin nodded. "I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing this to remind myself I never deserved what he gave me." Weeks passed. Brandon's name became a stain in the local business community. No one wanted to hire a disgraced logistics officer whose firing was tied to a major scandal. The whispers followed him from interview to interview. Eventually, he took a night shift at a delivery center in Brooklyn Park. Minimum wage, no benefits. His debts ballooned. Collection agencies called at all hours. His apartment, a cramped studio with peeling paint and broken blinds, echoed with the emptiness of someone who had burned every bridge. As for Alyssa, she vanished. Eliza reported that her family had whisked her away to Iowa, hoping to avoid further humiliation. On a crisp autumn morning, Caitlin received her final test results. The tumor was gone. She was in full remission. Eric met her outside the hospital with a thermos of green tea. "Ready to go home?" "I already am," she said, smiling. Caitlin didn't return to the old house. Instead, she purchased a modest lakeside cottage in Duluth, small, quiet, surrounded by pine trees and the sound of birds. No marble countertops or brand-name decor. Just her and the peace she had long been denied. Silver Med continued to thrive. Eric took over as COO, and Caitlin stepped back, focusing only on high-level strategy. Her employees, the ones who'd stood by her during treatment, welcomed her return with open arms. During a company-wide meeting, Eric gifted her a coffee mug that read, "Built by a housewife, led by a queen." She laughed for the first time in months. That evening, as the sun dipped below the lake's edge, Caitlin sat on her porch, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Eric joined her, handing her a glass of warm cider. "Ever think about marrying again?" he asked casually. She smirked. "Not yet, but maybe, someday." He nodded. "You deserve someone who sees you for who you are." "I already see her," she replied softly, and in that moment, as the breeze rustled through Pine needles and the stars blinked awake above the lake. Caitlin knew her story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming her voice. The snow had just begun to fall when Caitlin stepped into the sleek new Silver Med headquarters. A full year had passed since her life imploded and rebuilt itself in silence. This building, glass, steel, and resolve, was as much a reflection of her rebirth as it was a symbol of everything she'd earned. Yet, something inside her had remained untouched, a quiet ember glowing with unfinished business. The reckoning wasn't over. Brandon had stopped trying to call, but that didn't mean he was done. Late one Friday, Caitlin received an alert from Eliza. "He's filed a motion," the lawyer said, sighing. "A petition for financial relief, claims you manipulated him, that he's entitled to spousal support." Caitlin's lips curled into a bitter smile. "He's not asking for help. He's asking for rescue. It's desperate, and it won't hold. But we'll need to respond." Caitlin nodded. "Let him come." What Brandon didn't know was that Caitlin had spent the last few months not just healing, but documenting every insult, every bank transfer, every silent sacrifice backed with cold, hard proof. It was time to bring everything into the light. The hearing was scheduled on a snowy Tuesday. Caitlin arrived in a black coat, simple heels, and not a trace of fear. Eric accompanied her, briefcase in hand, and Eliza led the charge inside. Brandon looked different. Thinner, pale, suit wrinkled, and cheap. He didn't meet her eyes when she walked in, but his attorney, a smug man in a gray suit, did. "We believe Mr. Scott deserves reparations for the emotional distress and financial dependency he suffered under Mrs. Scott's deception," he began. Caitlin leaned forward. "Your Honor, I have documentation showing $1,400 deposited monthly into Mr. Scott's account for over 8 years. He had access to multiple vehicles, a mortgage he never contributed to, and an executive job offer at my company, which he declined." She placed a binder on the table. Eliza added another. "These are texts from Mr. Scott to his mistress, Alyssa Morgan. Included are timestamps, photos, and confidential complaints filed by Silver Med's partners during his employment." The courtroom shifted. Brandon's lawyer stumbled. Brandon looked like he wanted to disappear. The judge was unmoved. "Given the evidence and the petitioner's pattern of behavior, this court denies all claims of spousal support. Furthermore, Mrs. Scott's countersuit for emotional damages shall proceed outside." Cameras waited. Caitlin kept walking. Eliza dealt with reporters. Eric shielded her from the flashes. Inside the car, Eric exhaled. "It's over." "No," Caitlin said. "It's beginning." She used the compensation to fund a women's leadership foundation, one that trained women in financial independence, career reinvention, and emotional resilience. The first retreat was held at her lakeside home. Dozens of women came. Some had lost marriages. Some had survived cancer. Some just needed a hand. Caitlin stood in front of them not as a victim or a survivor, but as a guide. "You are not the pain you went through," she told them. "You are the power that came after." Brandon, meanwhile, continued to spiral. He appealed the court decision twice and lost both. Word of the lawsuit spread, tarnishing what was left of his name. A video surfaced online of him arguing with a manager at a temp agency. He became a warning. Caitlin became an example. One evening, she received a letter, no return address, no signature. It read, "I watched everything burn and realized I lit the match. I hope someday I find peace the way you did. I hope you remember the good things too." She read it once. Then again, she folded it neatly and placed it in the fireplace. Some stories didn't need to be revisited, only closed. Months passed. Silver Med expanded into Europe. Eric became CEO. Caitlin remained chairwoman but traveled less. She painted, read, and hosted retreats. One weekend, a storm hit Duluth. The power flickered. Caitlin lit candles and curled up with a book. Thunder rolled in the distance. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it ring, then it buzzed again. She picked it up. "Caitlin." The voice was unfamiliar, older, rough. This is Detective Mason from Hennepin County. We've found Brandon Scott. She sat upright. Is he alive? But it's serious. He was found unconscious in a warehouse. Overdose. No ID. Someone recognized him from a missing persons bulletin. Caitlin felt the world spin. She didn't speak. He listed you once as emergency contact. I'm no longer his contact, she said, quietly. But thank you. She didn't go to the hospital. She didn't call. She sat on her porch that night, watching the storm roll past. The reckoning hadn't ended with a courtroom victory. It hadn't ended with a fall or a triumph. It had ended the moment Caitlin chose silence over spite. It ended the moment she realized her past could no longer wound her. Brandon was a shadow. She was the light. Spring arrived early in Duluth. Snow melted into the soil. Birds returned. And for the first time in years, Caitlin let herself sleep in without guilt. The world she'd rebuilt stone by stone, breath by breath, no longer demanded she defend her worth. It welcomed her into it. She opened the windows each morning to let fresh air replace old echoes. The lake glittered in the sun. Her porch became a haven for quiet tea, worn books, and thoughts no longer filled with pain. Yet even peace, she knew, had layers. Healing was not a straight line. It was a spiral, revisiting memories from a higher place, breathing easier through them, even when they stung. 3 months after Brandon's overdose, Caitlin received a formal letter from the Hennepin County Social Services Office. Brandon had survived. He was in recovery at a state facility. According to the document, he had voluntarily entered a long-term rehabilitation program. Enclosed was a handwritten note. Dear Caitlin, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve to ask anything. I just wanted you to know I'm trying. I've started attending trauma sessions. They say honesty is the first step. I see now how much I was hiding from the world and myself. You didn't break me. You exposed what was already broken. Thank you for not saving me. It forced me to try. I wish you peace. Brandon. She folded the letter once, then again. She didn't reply, but she didn't throw it away either. Caitlin's nonprofit, the Ember Foundation, had grown faster than she imagined. Women from across the state and even other parts of the country applied for workshops, financial coaching, and healing retreats. They shared their stories: divorce, illness, rebuilding after betrayal. The room was always filled with laughter, tears, and something deeper, understanding. During one such retreat, a woman named Elena took Caitlin's hand and whispered, I thought I was weak for staying as long as I did. Now I know I was just trying to hold on to something already gone. Caitlin smiled softly. You weren't weak. You were hopeful. There's a difference. One afternoon, while finalizing the foundation's fiscal report, Eric knocked on the cottage's back door. He held a bag of groceries and a bouquet of wildflowers. You forgot lunch again, he teased. She laughed. I didn't forget. I reprioritized. They sat at the table near the window, the lake glinting beyond the trees. You've been glowing lately, he said. The team noticed too. Maybe because I finally stopped carrying what wasn't mine. Or maybe because you're finally allowing yourself to be happy. Caitlin paused, then asked, Do you ever regret not being more than colleagues? Eric tilted his head. No, because I think we still could be. When you're ready. She smiled, no longer guarded. I might be. That summer, Caitlin took her first vacation in over a decade. Alone, she traveled to coastal towns, hiked pine-covered trails, tasted unfamiliar food, and journaled every moment. The freedom felt foreign at first, but then natural. No texts to explain her whereabouts. No schedules dictated by someone else's needs. Just space. Just breath. She returned with wind-kissed cheeks, a few freckles, and a lightness no one had seen in her before. T. Silver Med, the board welcomed her with a surprise. A mural painted across the central stairwell. It was called The Ascent. A woman with a suitcase walked through a storm, eyes forward, back straight. Behind her, shadows tried to cling to her coat, but couldn't hold on. Above her, gold light broke through clouds. Caitlin stood in silence, tears brimming. "This was your journey," said one of the interns. She turned, surprised. "You painted this?" "Yes." The intern nodded. "We've all watched you climb, and we needed to remember it," Autumn returned. The lake turned to silver. The air crisped. Caitlin, now 44, stood on her porch in a soft wool shawl, hands cradling a steaming mug. Eric stood beside her. They said little. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was peace. "You know," Caitlin said, "I used to think love meant sacrificing until you had nothing left." Eric looked at her gently. "What do you think now?" "I think love is what remains when the storms pass and someone's still standing beside you. Not because they have to, but because they want to." He reached for her hand, and this time, she let him hold it. They didn't rush into anything. Love, Caitlin had learned, wasn't urgent. It was consistent. Evening walks, shared books, homemade dinners where silence was as warm as laughter. One night, under the stars, Eric asked, "If we wrote a book about all this, what would we call it?" Caitlin looked up, smile soft and sure. The shadow she carried, because she had carried it. And now, she had let it go.